A seasoned surgeon, Dr. James Carter, had seen countless accidents. But when a young girl was rushed into the emergency room with severe injuries, something about her struck him. Her face was bruised and her leg badly broken. But it wasn't just her physical pain that lingered in his mind, it was the fear in her eyes. As Dr. Carter prepared for surgery, he promised himself that he would do everything to save her. Little did he know, the girl he was fighting to save wasn't just another patient. She had a secret, one that would come to change everything and lead to a chain of events Dr. Carter never could have predicted. Would he be able to save her in time? Dr. James Carter, a seasoned surgeon in his early 40s, stood in the bustling emergency room, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. Nurses and doctors moved swiftly, attending to patients with practiced efficiency. Amidst the commotion, a young girl, approximately 10 years old, was wheeled in on a stretcher. Her face was bruised, and her leg appeared badly injured. Dr. Carter approached, his expression softening as he knelt beside her. "You're going to be okay," he reassured her gently. "We're here to help you." The girl nodded weakly, her eyes filled with fear. Dr. Carter turned to the nurses, his voice firm. "Prepare for immediate surgery. Let's move her to the operating room." As the team wheeled the girl away, Dr. Carter followed, his mind already focused on the procedure ahead. In the operating room, Dr. Carter donned his gloves and mask, his hands steady as he prepared for the surgery. The nurses worked in synchrony, setting up the necessary instruments. The girl was unconscious, her small body vulnerable on the operating table. Dr. Carter took a deep breath, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment before he began the procedure. Hours later, the surgery was complete. Dr. Carter stood over the girl, monitoring her vitals. The operation had been successful, but he knew the next 24 hours were critical. He turned to the nurses. "Keep a close watch on her. Notify me immediately if there's any change." He removed his gloves and mask, his face weary but relieved. As he exited the operating room, he spotted Mrs. Williams, the girl's mother, sitting anxiously in the waiting area. Her face was etched with worry, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dr. Carter approached her, offering a reassuring smile. "She's stable now," he said softly. "The surgery went well. We'll monitor her overnight, but I believe she'll make a full recovery." Mrs. Williams stood, tears welling in her eyes. She embraced Dr. Carter, her gratitude overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Dr. Carter patted her back gently, his voice warm. "It's my job. She's a strong girl. She'll pull through." As Mrs. Williams stepped back, Dr. Carter noticed her daughter Lucy, standing nearby. The young girl looked up at him with wide eyes, her face a mixture of fear and hope. Dr. Carter smiled at her, his heart warmed by her trust. "She's going to be okay," he assured Lucy. "You can go see her now." Lucy nodded, her face lighting up with a smile. She ran to her mother, and they walked together toward the recovery room. Dr. Carter watched them go, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He had made a difference today. He turned to leave, but his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his wife, Emma. "How was your day, James?" He smiled, typing a quick reply. "Long. We had a tough case. A young girl, about 10, hit by a car. She's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while." He hit send and slipped the phone back into his pocket. As he walked toward the exit, he felt the weight of the day settling on him. He was exhausted, but he knew he had done his best. He stepped into the cool evening air, the city lights twinkling around him. He hailed a cab and climbed in, leaning back against the seat. At home, Emma was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The aroma of roasted chicken and vegetables filled the air. Their daughter, Lucy, was sitting at the table, her face buried in a book. Emma looked up as Dr. Carter entered, her face lighting up with a smile. "How was your day, James?" she asked, her voice warm. "Long," he replied, removing his coat. We had a tough case. A young girl, about 10, hit by a car. She's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while. Emma set the table, her face showing concern. That sounds awful. How's the family holding up? They're relieved, Dr. Carter said, hanging up his coat. The mother was beside herself. I think she was ready to lose it. Lucy looked up from her book, sensing the somber tone. Is she going to be okay, Daddy? She asked innocently. Dr. Carter smiled at his daughter, trying to lighten the mood. She'll be fine, sweetheart, thanks to the doctors and nurses. Emma served dinner, and they sat down together. The conversation turned to lighter topics, but Dr. Carter couldn't shake the image of the young girl from his mind. He had seen many patients over the years, but something about this case had affected him deeply. Later that evening, as they sat in the living room, Dr. Carter's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Mrs. Williams. Dr. Carter? It's Mrs. Williams. I don't know how to say this, but… Lucy, my Lucy, she's missing. Dr. Carter's face paled. He stood up abruptly, his heart racing. What do you mean missing? He typed back quickly. She was playing in the yard, and now she's gone. I can't find her anywhere. Dr. Carter grabbed his coat and rushed out the door, his mind racing. He hailed a cab and gave the driver the address. As the cab sped through the city streets, Dr. Carter's thoughts were a whirlwind. How could this happen? He had just saved a girl named Lucy, and now another Lucy was missing. He couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. He arrived at the Williams home to find police cars parked outside. Mrs. Williams stood on the porch, wringing her hands. A police officer approached Dr. Carter. Are you Dr. Carter? The officer asked. Yes, Dr. Carter replied, his voice tight. What's going on? Mrs. Williams reported her daughter missing, the officer explained. We're conducting a search, but we haven't found her yet. Dr. Carter turned to Mrs. Williams, his heart aching for her. Stay where you are, he said gently. I'm here to help. We'll find her. He joined the search, his mind focused on the task at hand. Hours passed, and the search continued. Dr. Carter's thoughts kept returning to the girl he had saved earlier. He couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection between the two Lucys. He had to find out. As dawn approached, Dr. Carter received a call. It was from the hospital. Dr. Carter, the voice on the other end said, "We found a girl matching Lucy's description. She's at the emergency room." Dr. Carter's heart skipped a beat. He thanked the caller and rushed to the hospital. In the emergency room, he found Lucy, the young girl he had operated on earlier, sitting on a gurney. She was crying, her face streaked with tears. Dr. Carter approached her, his voice gentle. "Lucy," he said softly. "What happened?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with fear.